Growing up, I always admired my family's resilience and the strength of our bond. My parents, Patricia and Richard, built a life rooted in hard work and family values. They taught my brother, Nathan, and me the importance of loyalty and carrying forward the legacy of our family business. Even as a child, I knew Benton Manufacturing was more than just a company. It was the cornerstone of our identity. After college, I took on my role in the company with pride, eager to contribute to its success. Nathan, my younger brother, joined the team too, though our approaches to work were as different as night and day. While I focused on precision and strategy, Nathan excelled at charm and persuasion. Despite the occasional clash, I always believed our shared commitment to the company and family would prevail over any rivalry. Friday had arrived, and I had dropped off my Volvo at the service center for maintenance. Instead of returning to the office, I asked the mechanic to drop me off at home since he would deliver the car later that evening. It was a sunny spring day, the kind of weather that invites you to tackle outdoor chores, so the decision was an easy one. As I busied myself clearing leaves near the edge of the backyard, I noticed the unmistakable red gleam of my brother's Corvette pulling into the driveway. Great, I thought. The only time he comes over is when he needs something he never returns. As I got closer, I heard my son Leo call out, "Hey Dad, what's up in the land of chickens?" Dad, why is he calling my brother Dad? And why is this the land of chickens? Nathan replied, "I'm dropping off. Uncle Joe's saw. I cut the cord by mistake, and he needs to fix it so I can finish my project. Is Clueless Joe here?" He added, "Clueless Joe?" I thought, my name is Joe, and I certainly don't think I'm clueless, at least I didn't until now. Maybe I should stay outside and just listen. Of course, I turned on my phone to record the conversation. Leo answered, "Clueless isn't home. He's usually not here before 5. I don't spend much time with him." Then Leo asked, "So when can I visit you now that school's out? It's way more fun there than here. I'd love for you to come, but your mom wants to spend as much time with you as she can. You're her only child, and when you leave, she'll be lonely. Cut her some slack on this." Leo replied, "She promised to spend time with me Thursday afternoon, so I can ask about staying with you this summer." Then he asked, "Why doesn't Mom divorce Clueless and move in with you?" I had no idea she spent afternoons at Nathan's house. Everything started falling into place in a way I hated. Maybe I was clueless. Nathan bragged, "Ever since I got her pregnant with your child, I've asked her about leaving Joe. She says, 'You're great in bed, but you'd be a terrible husband.' I love my husband. Every moment with him is the best. But with you, the intimacy is amazing. That's why she won't divorce Joe, but still sleeps with me. Anyway, I've got to go. I'll see you tomorrow at the family party," he said casually, as if it were no big deal. I felt like I was going to collapse. My world was falling apart. My son wasn't really mine, and my wife had been involved with my brother in ways I never imagined. I stumbled back to the yard and sat on the rope swing. I had pushed Leo on that swing countless times. Now I sat there crying, the tears mixing with the mud at my feet. What was I supposed to do? I needed to figure this out before taking any action. Then it hit me. The DNA test. Years ago, we all did the 23andMe test. How could it be wrong unless Diane swapped my sample with Nathan's, hiding the truth about Leo's parentage? Could she have done something so cruel to me? As that thought faded, I took stock of my life. I'm Joe Benton, 43, and I haven't gained much weight since college minus 175 pounds. I wasn't a jock, but I was a good distance runner. Now, between family and work, I run a few times a week. I work as the CFO and COO of Benton's Machine Company, a family business. My grandfather started as a blacksmith, and now we make precision aerospace parts. My dad, Richard, is the president, and my brother Nathan is the CMO. I have degrees in industrial engineering and accounting, which is why I handle the finances and operations. Nathan, my younger brother, is everything I'm not. At 6'3", he towers over me by 5 inches and weighs 50 pounds more. A classic jock, big, loud, arrogant, and often a bully. Nathan was a star running back in high school. A small college scholarship got him through school, while I worked and took out loans. He barely graduated, with professors passing him just to keep him eligible for football. With a degree in physical education, Nathan struggled to find a job, so he joined Benton as a junior mechanic. Our work demands precision, which wasn't his strength, but he used his name to land new clients. While he couldn't discuss the technical side, he was great at talking his way through things. Don't get me wrong, Nathan was good at his job and valuable to the company, but we often clashed. One time, Nathan wanted a commission for new sales. It wasn't unreasonable, but he was already drawing a salary equal to mine. I used that moment to ask to keep all the income from my patents. Dad quickly gave in to Nathan, but I had to fight for what I earned. I first noticed Diane during a 5K charity run. She wore loose shorts and a t-shirt, and her shape, particularly her backside, caught my eye. As a runner, I was faster than her, but I preferred staying behind her. By the end of the race, I was the only one focused on her. After she stumbled while avoiding a dropped water bottle, I helped steady her. "Thanks," she said, smiling. I didn't want to fall. "I'm Joe," I introduced myself. "I'm Diane. Can I run with you just to make sure you don't fall again?" she asked with a grin. "Sure," was her reply. That was the start of our relationship. Diane had a degree in secondary education and worked as an English teacher. A year after we met, we got married in her home church. After 2 wonderful years, we decided to start a family. Despite our best efforts, countless nights and weekends focused on getting pregnant, Diane couldn't conceive. We tried everything. Changing diets, different positions, tracking ovulation, but nothing worked. Neither of us wanted to give fertility tests yet. Maybe in a year, we thought. Then Diane missed her period. She didn't tell me right away, worried about jinxing it. When she missed a second one, I was overjoyed. I had always wanted a family, and our Benton legacy was something I deeply valued. But the pregnancy wasn't easy. Diane was bedridden for the final 2 months, and the delivery almost cost both her and our son. Leo, who grew too large for her pelvis, was delivered by caesarean section. The doctor warned us against trying for another child due to the high risk to Diane's health. That was it for us. Leo became our one and only. Leo was an energetic boy, full of life. He loved roughhousing with me, much to Diane's dismay. We spent hours tossing a ball around. His grades weren't stellar, but average for his age. However, after his 15th birthday, our relationship began to change. I figured it was just typical teenage rebellion. He used to enjoy spending time with me, but now he was too busy with his phone and handheld games. When I tried to talk to him, he became surly and distant, often mocking my career as an accountant, especially as he grew taller and more muscular than I was. Over the years, Diane continued to be the ideal wife, smart, dedicated, and now the principal of Lincoln School, which specialized in helping students with academic and behavioral struggles. But I started noticing tension at home. Her stress from work seemed to spill over, and she'd make sharp comments about things I did or didn't do. Despite this, she remained affectionate at bedtime. Our intimate life was fulfilling and frequent. So when I overheard my brother Nathan telling Leo that he was his father and had been sleeping with Diane for over 17 years, I was stunned. But what did I really know? The most troubling thing was that Leo's body frame resembled Nathan's and my father's, but not mine. Everything felt off, but I wasn't sure what. That evening, I watched Diane closely. There were no obvious signs of an affair. Dinner was lively, and after Leo went out with friends, Diane and I cleaned the kitchen together. She asked me to load the dishwasher while she went to the bathroom, then returned wearing only a lace apron, telling me to hurry up because she had plans for me. We laughed, touched, and finished cleaning before heading to bed, where I experienced some of the most passionate intimacy I'd ever had. She was passionate and responsive. No signs of pretense. The next morning, we drove to my parents' house for my father's 70th birthday. Diane didn't want to ride in my Volvo, and Leo wanted to drive himself, so we all went in her Lexus. At my parents' house, the greetings were routine. Diane, Leo, then me. But when Nathan hugged Diane, it was warm and enthusiastic on his part, while her response was flat, even bored. This wasn't how a lover should behave after 17 years of an affair. I was beginning to piece things together, but I didn't want to seem suspicious, so I casually tested the waters. I asked Nathan if he'd cover for me at the office on Thursday, knowing he had no clue about accounting. He said he'd be out for a big project. Diane, sitting across from him, made a strange noise as she blew bubbles in her iced tea, a signal that I was on the right track. I pressed further, joking, "Will you get all sweaty from this big project?" He responded, "Nah, I've worked with this person before and always come out on top." Diane's reaction was so intense I could feel the tension rise. The room went silent. No one moved, no forks clinked, no ice rattled in glasses. It was like a graveyard. I realized they all knew. I was still playing the role of clueless Joe, but I was starting to understand what was really going on. Breaking the silence, Dad announced, "I'm retiring from being president of Benton. Nathan will take over as president. Joe's salary will be 75% of Nathan's, but with his patent income, you'll both make about the same." It was clear now. The family business, my father's legacy, was being passed down to Nathan, and I had been kept in the dark all this time. Diane squeezed my arm, giving me a warm smile. "So I report directly to Nathan?" I asked, trying to clarify. "Nathan, the guy who can't tell a CNC machine from a popcorn popper. That's a disaster waiting to happen," Diane replied with a shake of her head. Before I could respond, she continued, "Listen, little brother, I've always been the one in charge while you've been busy counting beans. It takes an alpha, not a timid person like you, to lead. Deal with it, Joe. Once again, I win, you lose. That's enough, boys," Dad cut in, his voice firm. He turned to Nathan, who had been quiet up until now. "Nathan, you won't be the boss. I'm still the chairman of the board, and I own all the stock. You'll run this business the way I tell you. This company has been in the family for over 100 years, and I won't let it fall apart. We're Benton's, and the legacy is in our hands. Just like the men on the wall." Dad pointed to the framed photos of 3 generations of Bentons that lined the living room wall. "By the way, Dad, which picture is your grandfather?" I asked, curious. Dad paused for a moment before answering. "He's on the left next to my father." I thought, "I'm on the far end. Surely you know that." "I was just confirming," I said, "because I have a question." I glanced at the pictures. I don't look like any Benton, alive or dead. Different body type, hair color, facial expression. Nathan and Leo look like Bentons, but not me. What's going on? My mother's shoulders sagged, and Dad's face went red. The room went silent, and everyone exchanged uncomfortable looks. I had dropped a bomb, and now they had to deal with it. "Joe, it's time you knew the family secret," Dad said, his voice heavy. "Your mother and I were planning to marry, but she got pregnant after a night of poor judgment at her bachelorette party. We were already together, so she thought the baby was mine. When you were born, you were small and sickly, but we thought it was because of your mother's complications. We didn't know until you were about 10 that you weren't my biological son. Your mother had kept it hidden. She had been involved with someone else before we were married. And you looked like him. When DNA tests became available, we confirmed you weren't my son, but Nathan was. That explained a lot about how I treated you differently from Nathan. But it wasn't the bombshell I was expecting. I had been trying to find out about Leo's biological father, and got this instead. Still, I had more questions. Okay, Dad, that explains my body type. But why doesn't Leo look like me? Why does he resemble you and Nathan? Dad's voice softened. Joe, you and Diane were desperate to have a child. It was stressful for Diane, and she sought advice from your mother. After a lot of thought, we realized you were likely sterile from your severe case of mumps. We knew that for the Benton legacy to continue, Nathan needed to help. Diane was reluctant at first, but she agreed because we all wanted the family to continue. We hoped this wouldn't come out. I felt overwhelmed, like a storm was raging inside my head. No words came to me. Both Diane and my mom held me, tears in their eyes, knowing how much pain I was in. My mom whispered, my son, I'm so proud of you." And Diane said softly, my husband, I love you so much." Dad added, "We hoped you'd understand, Joe, and embrace the love we all have for you." "Gee, Richard," I muttered bitterly, "can I call you Richard now that I know you're not my father? Why would you think I wouldn't mind being humiliated by my own family?" Leo sneered, "Now you know what it's like to be humiliated." I felt my anger rise. "So you encouraged my brother to father my child, not mine, just to keep the Benton bloodline going. You kept me working for a pittance to boost your profits. You made me think I'd be running the show one day. But I guess Benton blood is more important than competence. I can't believe you did this to me. What's next? Are you going to tell me Diane's still sleeping with Nathan?" The room went still. I waited for an answer, bracing myself. Diane finally spoke in a small, trembling voice. "I'm sorry, Joe. I didn't love him. I despise him for what he is, but I needed him to keep my sanity." She collapsed to the floor, sobbing. My instinct was to comfort her, but my anger held me back. She had done this to herself. She had to face the consequences. Dad spoke, his voice shaky. "I'm sorry, son, but—" "Son," I interrupted sharply. "Don't call me that. You destroyed my whole life, gave me nothing but the bare minimum of affection compared to Nathan, and encouraged Diane to be unfaithful, all while I had no idea. I was just a fool. Now you're telling me I'm not even your son. You've all been laughing behind my back while I played the oblivious idiot. I'm done with all of you. You've been deceiving me for your own gain, and none of it benefited me. I'm nothing but a naive man, lost and abandoned with no one to help me." With that, I stormed toward the door. But just as I reached it, Nathan grabbed my arm. "I'm sorry, Joe," he said with a smirk. "Since this means so much to you, I'll stop deceiving your wife. She's all worn out from me anyway, so I'll give her back to you." The arrogance of that man hit me like a slap. I turned toward him, seething, and swung a punch aimed at his face, only to miss and strike him in the throat instead. His eyes bulged, and he gasped for air, collapsing to his knees. I didn't hesitate. I stepped back and kicked him in the groin, watching him scream and crumple in pain. Diane and Leo rushed to him, but their reactions were different. Leo tried to comfort his mother's partner, while Diane began kicking Nathan and shouting, "You deserve this." I left the chaos behind and got into Diane's car. I backed it into Nathan's prized Corvette before speeding away, clipping Richard's new pickup on the way out. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and anger, and I could barely keep the car on the road. I found a deserted gas station to stop and let my emotions run wild. First, I cried until I thought I might pass out. Then the anger exploded and I pounded the car's dashboard. Finally, exhaustion set in and I was too drained to move. As I sat there, my phone buzzed repeatedly with texts and calls from Diane. I sighed deeply. What could I do now? They had shattered everything. Not only was I betrayed, but my mother had also kept the truth about my real father hidden from me. 3 days ago, I was on top of the world. Now my life felt like a total mess. The only good thing I could focus on was that I had options. I could remain the oblivious Joe, keep my low pay and report to Nathan or Richard. But seeing them every day would gut me, especially after what they had done. I couldn't do it. Option 1 was out. Option 2 was to quietly leave and let the Benton family carry on without me. But they wouldn't care. I was already invisible to them. That wasn't an option either. Option 3 was the one I liked. Stay in the family, but on my terms. I would make them regret every lie, every deceit, and every betrayal. I'd make them feel the same pain they caused me. Yeah, that felt right. I was 20 miles from home, and it was time to go. Diane's car was in the yard, not the driveway, and I'd packed up everything I needed into my Volvo. Important papers, clothes, and all. Anything I didn't need immediately went into Leo's Acura. Bullet, Leo's annoying dog, whimpered at me as I left, but I was glad to be rid of the hassle. He left me a parting gift, a big pile of debris next to the house. I scooped it up, walked into the master bedroom, and placed it on the wedding ring quilt that my mother and grandmother made for us, topped off with my wedding ring. Diane would get the message. I stacked all the photos of her and Nathan's child on the dining table and hammered a nail through them, shattering the glass. Then I was done. I drove my packed Volvo to a hotel across town, unloaded it, and went to the airport. After renting a car, I picked up Leo's car, put it in storage, and began setting up my new life. I didn't want to be found, so I stayed out of sight, eating pizza and drinking beer in my hotel room. While I hid, I moved all my personal funds, closed joint credit cards, and took the money. I emptied Leo's college fund, which I had saved for him, leaving him with nothing. He would have to ask Nathan for that now. That night, it took some effort to sleep. I kept thinking about the good times with my family. But the truth hit me. They never cared about me. So why should I care about them? I shifted from Oblivious Joe to Fierce Joe. Tomorrow, Fierce Joe would hit Benton Manufacturing. I parked a little distance from the office, not wanting to be noticed, and broke into the building. As CFO, I had full access to the company's accounts. I moved all the money into the main account, leaving just enough for 2 payrolls. I maxed out the credit line and transferred everything to our Cayman Islands account. I changed all the login details so no one could access anything. I even updated the address to a fake one, cut off utilities, and made sure everything was set up to be untraceable. I laughed at myself as I finished. The Benton men had always kept every business record, but now everything was in the cloud, and I was the only one who could change anything. I had them exactly where I wanted them. I changed all the passwords and login details, locking everyone out of the accounts and machines. Nathan's computer was next. I copied files, videos of him with staff, local spouses, and of course, Diane, onto a thumb drive. I didn't tamper with his computer, saving this for later. The utility room was my final stop. It wasn't just a utility room. It was a fortress. The main power line entered here, and the room was secured. The only people with access were the electrician and me. I turned off the power and added new locks. By the time they figured out the problem, the power company would shut off the supply. The keys to the building and everything else were soaked in cleaning fluid to erase any trace of ownership. Walking out of the building that had been my life's work felt strange. I had always dreamed of running the company, but those dreams had turned into nightmares. Nathan partied with his buddies while I worked to dismantle the business. My family's texts and emails were all the same. "We love you. We're sorry. Please talk to us." I was done. My mother begged for forgiveness, asking me to make things work with Diane and Leo, but the number 17 kept coming to mind, minus 17 years of Diane betraying me with him. My whole world had crumbled, and I was ready to move on. I called my lawyer, Bob Carson, and scheduled a meeting for Tuesday afternoon. I gathered the documents I needed and planned my attack. I wanted to file for divorce on grounds of infidelity, but I doubted Diane would agree to move to another state for that. I also didn't want to pay child support, but was okay with splitting everything 50-50ths. Benton stock wasn't an option, as I didn't own any. Diane's salary was close to mine, so Bob thought the divorce could be quick unless she fought it. We would serve her papers at her school. Time to make her feel the shame she had put me through. At the meeting, I also mentioned rearranging Benton's funds. As CFO, I had authorization to move money, but Bob warned me it could lead to a lawsuit if it caused Benton any loss. I didn't care. They would have to spend a fortune to sue me, and I was ready to air all their dirty laundry in court if it came to that. Bob mentioned a $3,000 retainer for any future work. I quickly scheduled meetings with 3 companies that wanted my services and access to my patents. There was no reason to stay in town anymore. I had friends who could help, but I didn't want to burden them. My only option now was to fight my way up, start over, and leave this mess behind at 43 with nothing but a new chance ahead. A week later, Bob Carson called. "Joe, I just got back from the county attorney's office. Richard is demanding your arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and grand theft." Bob explained to the county attorney and Richard that all the funds were in a Benton account that had been active for years. The money still belongs to the company. Nothing's been withdrawn. Richard just needs to arrange for a new signer on the account. I knew this would force Richard to fly to the Caymans, a trip he hated, especially over water. A month after Diane was served divorce papers, my lawyer called to ask if I had responded to her calls. I laughed. Of course not. No calls, texts, emails, or letters. The divorce was stalled because Diane was fighting over Leo's college fund in court. Even my lawyer thought it would be tough to get those past the judge. I told him I'd agree to split the college fund. If she doesn't like that, I'll sue for fraud. I've paid for Leo's expenses for 16 years, believing I was his father. I'll sue Diane, Nathan, Patricia, and Richard. I might not win, but the media would have a field day with Benton's dirty laundry. A week later, my lawyer called again. Diane was willing to sign the papers if I met with her for an hour. She wanted to explain her actions. I didn't care to see or talk to her, but I agreed. I needed to wrap up everything legally and be done with her and anyone named Benton. Under the condition, it was just the 2 of us. I also insisted on recording the meeting to ensure I wasn't trapped or harmed. It might sound paranoid, but after 17 years of being oblivious, I wasn't taking any chances. At 3 p.m. the next week, I backed my rental car into my old driveway. Seeing no suspicious cars, I walked to the door, which opened as if she had been waiting for me. No fancy dress, no special dinner, just 2 stacks of papers to finalize our divorce. The marriage had already ended emotionally. The paperwork was just the final step. She offered a drink, but I declined. I didn't care how she was. Instead, I said, "You got me here. Go ahead, start." For the next 15 minutes, I listened to Diane repeat the same tired script. The cheater's apology, word for word. Nothing new. I tried to keep track of how many "I'm sorries" and "can we work this out." She threw at me, but her words were starting to bore me. She even went so far as to quote the family history, mentioning how Richard had forgiven my mother using the bolded letters I had written. The numbers were clear. Once a year for 17 years, 24 times each year, adding up to 408 times on her envelope. "It wasn't that many times, Joe," Diane said. "Okay, show me the math. How many times?" I shot back. In a small, shaky voice, she murmured, "Too many." There was no anger on my face, just a complete lack of emotion. When she saw my disinterest, she changed her approach. "Do you want to ask me any questions?" she asked, her voice softening. I met her gaze and asked, "Why?" After a heavy sigh, Diane began, "You know, I was pressured into having a child with Nathan's contribution, your dad." "Oh, sorry," I muttered. Richard really wanted that Benton bloodline to continue. He was worried that any woman Nathan got involved with wouldn't be good enough to carry the family name. "Even when I was trying to get pregnant with Leo, I still slept with you, hoping you'd be the one to get me pregnant. I really wanted to have your baby and be a family, but I screwed that up." The urge to call her the same unrefined name Richard despised was tempting, but I resisted. I let her stew in her own words for a moment before responding. I don't agree with your conclusion, Diane. I've heard that excuse enough times to be disgusted by the idea of Nathan's child being some sort of bond in our family. Diane shook her head, a defensive edge creeping back into her tone. So was keeping up the affair with Nathan, while pregnant, your way of holding our family together? Was it that enjoyable? Humiliating me in secret? No, Joe. It had nothing to do with you, she said, her voice softer now. Nonsense, I retorted. It had everything to do with me. I was your husband. You promised not to sleep with anyone else, least of all my brother. What made you think it was okay to be with other people? I'm sorry, I misspoke, Joe, she corrected quickly. What I meant was, it was more about me than you. When I chose to get pregnant with Nathan, I realized he wasn't nearly as attentive as you. He was selfish, all about his own needs, not mine. I couldn't wait for him to stop. I hated the way he made me feel. Uncomfortable and neglected. After I got pregnant, I stopped seeing him. From then on, all my love was for you because you cared about me and made me feel cherished. Which you did, I replied flatly. After being with him, I appreciated how you treated me, both in and out of the bedroom. Diane continued. So you went back to him because I was too good a partner? I asked incredulously. That's ridiculous, she said, shaking her head in frustration. This may sound awful, I began, but the whole Nathan situation sounds pretty awful. Let's just get on with this sad story about how you had to endure the big, challenging man who didn't please you, I said with a bitter edge. Please, Joe, I only have an hour left to talk to you. I still love you, but I know I've ruined my chances with you. I just want to convince you that what I did had nothing to do with our relationship. You were the best husband I could have asked for, but I have a flaw. I've been successful in life, and sometimes that makes me think I'm smarter or better than others. I lose sight of my compassion and act arrogantly. I needed someone to treat me harshly, and Nathan fit that role. This flaw emerged when your parents pressured me into having Nathan's child instead of yours. You mean when you were treated like a commodity? I interrupted, my voice rising. I suppose that's one way to put it, she replied. There was no love involved. We were intimate, and then I left. No cuddling, no kissing. Afterward, I appreciated the intimacy, but not the loving kind we had. It was about the rough passion, his forceful approach without emotional connection. Afterward, there was nothing. No affection, no promises, no plans, just rough intimacy when I needed it. Sometimes twice a month, sometimes not for months. Nathan didn't care about frequency. The bottom line is, Joe, I went back to him because I needed that humiliation. I needed something to keep me grounded, to stop feeling so superior. It wasn't because you were a bad partner. You were tender, loving, and treated me like royalty. But I used Nathan to address my own issues. Looking back, I see I made a huge mistake, and I'm sorry. I hurt the best man I've ever known. I hope that someday, when all this is behind us, you'll remember the good times we had. That's a pretty far-fetched story, I said skeptically. At least I know most of the facts. Or do I? I asked, narrowing my eyes. She replied quietly, yes, you know all the facts now. Do I really? Let's see what I don't know. When was the last time he was with you? The last time I saw him was when I kicked him in the kidneys after that awful day at your parents' house. I assume he didn't use protection. I pressed. She shook her head, confirming my suspicion. Did you ever think Nathan's impressive physique could give you an infection? I asked, my voice harsh. She only shrugged. Did we ever have intimacy on the same day you were with Nathan? I asked, watching her face pale. I always took care of myself afterwards, both immediately and later at home, she responded, but the answer didn't settle my question. That didn't answer my question. How many times, Diane? I pressed again. Not many, Joe. But there were times when you really wanted intimacy, and I didn't want to turn you away. I told you I'd rather please you, and that you didn't need to go further. Now that we've danced around the issue, let's get to the truth. Did you ever receive second thoughts after him? I asked, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. She hesitated. I didn't keep track, but yes, there were probably times when it happened. I can't give you an exact number, but it probably did. The lasagna I had for lunch at Mama Anna's restaurant was now boiling in my stomach, like the lava of an empty volcano. The thought that I had received second thoughts pushed me to the edge. Just like the volcano, hot lava erupted from my mouth in a full-blown projectile outburst. Suddenly, the table and Diane were covered in the remnants of my previous meal. I stumbled toward the door, leaving a trail of small chunks of meat and pasta behind. Diane's sobs echoed in my ears. I guessed she didn't appreciate having food on her carpet and dress. Too bad my attorney had to redo the paperwork because no one at the courthouse would accept it. 6 hours later, the divorce was finalized, with me receiving half of the college fund and car proceeds. Diane kept the house until that troublesome Leo finished high school. I'm sure he was upset, but since he didn't want me in his life anymore, I took my money and left. Since I didn't father that ungrateful child, I refused to pay child support. If the court demanded it, I'd change the filing to infidelity and sue all the Bentons for fraud. No one wanted that kind of disgrace. Hell, I was already ashamed to be a Benton. During my self-imposed exile, I was torn about whether to review the video files I had downloaded from Nathan's office. I was still struggling to process Diane's betrayal, let alone be calm enough to watch two people I despised having intimacy. Each file was named, and when I saw the name Sindra on a relatively small file, a chill ran down my spine. Sindra was the wife of one of my best friends, John Brown. John was 2 years ahead of me in high school, but we barely spoke back then. He was athletic, and I was studious. But this studious kid helped the athlete pass his English class. John excelled in science and math, but struggled with English. Over the semester, we became friends, and after he left for a small college on a football scholarship, we lost touch. When he came back to town after graduation to be near his aging parents, he asked me about work. I was happy to see that his skills lined up with what we needed in the shop. I recommended him for a job, and we picked up our friendship where we left off. A couple of years ago, John and Sindra hit a rough patch. From what I heard, Sindra had gone out for a girls' night and either got extremely inebriated or passed out. Somehow she ended up with another man. A shame, she told John as soon as she got home, but by then the damage was done. They had 2 young children, and a divorce would have been disastrous. The Sindra video file was the smallest, and it started with her stumbling into a hotel room. It was clear someone had set up a phone camera on the dresser. She walked like a zombie, staring at the king-size bed. Nathan walked into the frame and undressed the disoriented Sindra. At first, I thought there was no audio, but soon I realized it was because there was no talking. I had always been impressed by Sindra in a swimsuit at the lake, but seeing her without clothes left me breathless. I could understand why John didn't want to lose her. I watched the video of Nathan and Sindra, and it was disturbing. Nathan treated her with complete indifference, showing no regard for her as a person, a cold, detached interaction that left no doubt about how little he cared. Afterward, he grabbed a drink from the mini-fridge and lit a cigarette. Sindra shuffled to the bathroom, cleaned herself up, got dressed, and left. No words, just a cold encounter. John had always wondered what happened that night, but now I had the evidence if he ever wanted to seek retribution. I invited him over to my apartment to talk. After a couple of beers, he asked what the top-secret conversation was about. "Unbeknownst to you, John, I came across a video of your wife with another man," I said. "It looks like she was either extremely inebriated, passed out, or both. I can tell you who it was, show you the video, or both, whichever would hurt the least." It took John a while to compose himself. Tears welled up in his eyes, and his voice deepened. I placed my hand on his shoulder but stayed silent. "Who was it?" he finally asked. "Brother Nathan," I replied. But she can't stand him. She thinks he's foolish. Why would she be with Nathan? John's voice was full of disbelief. As I said, John, she was not fully conscious. I'll show you the video so you can see for yourself. She wasn't the one making the moves. After watching the video, John's face fell. He now knew the truth. His wife had no idea who the man was and couldn't explain why they had been intimate. She cried uncontrollably as she confessed everything to him. Why would he take advantage of an employee's spouse like this? John asked, trying to stay calm but clearly struggling. It was a one-time occurrence, and he never contacted her again, she explained, her voice trembling with guilt. My guess, John, is that he didn't even know her last name. He probably did the unthinkable with the most attractive woman in the room and went for it. He didn't care about her name, just her appearance, I added bluntly. John stood up and wiped his eyes. Thanks, Joe. Surprisingly, this helps. I'm glad I forgave her before because she was so upset and remorseful. But now I know the facts. I'm not sure if I'll tell Sindra, though. I'll have to play it by ear. Can I have this video, Joe? He asked, his voice calmer now. Of course. I think it's the only copy, I said. John hesitated for a moment, then looked at me with a wry smile. Would you be upset if your brother had a few mishaps in the next few months? Be my guest, I replied with a shrug. It works in my favor too. I already kicked him once, so I'll be the prime suspect. Just let me know when, so I can have my alibi ready. Thanks, Joe. You're like a brother to me, he said. Yeah, and you're a much better brother than I ever had. We hugged, and as he left, he called over his shoulder, keep in touch. I didn't spend much time reviewing the videos of Diane and Nathan. It just wasn't worth it. The thought of them disturbed me too much. Eventually, I decided to delete all the videos with Diane's name on them. I didn't want to see those two ever again. But as I was erasing the files, fate stepped in, and I accidentally hit play instead of delete. When I accidentally played one of the videos of Diane and Nathan, I saw enough to confirm what I already suspected. Diane appeared fully engaged in the situation, with no signs of hesitation, and it was clear she was complicit in what was happening. She wasn't lying when she said that with Nathan, her husband, family, and friends all disappeared from her mind. Of course, she scolded me harshly like she once did. The woman I had once loved and dreamed of was now humiliating herself like this, and it hit me hard. That moment wiped away every good memory I had of her. 2 weeks later, John came over for a beer to thank me for answering some awful questions that had haunted him for years. He also thanked me for showing him that Sindra had been mistreated, not unfaithful. He had an idea to use the remaining recordings to expose cheating spouses and help devastated husbands by Nathan's actions. I gladly handed over the rest of the distasteful videos to him. Meanwhile, my job search was progressing. One of Benton's main competitors reached out and asked me to come for an interview in their city. It was the first glimpse of happiness I'd felt in a while. I made myself available at any time they wanted to meet. The Donen Corporation, led by CEO Tim Donen, offered me an attractive employment package. The only catch was that I had to meet with the head of Reynolds Resources for a personality evaluation. After everything I'd been through in the past few months, I worried about what they might find wrong with me. The person I was supposed to meet the next morning at 10 was Mickey D. Reynolds, the owner. Reynolds Resources did more than just personality evaluations. They handled HR duties, employee recruitment, corporate governance, and reporting for Donen Manufacturing. Tim had said it took a load off his mind, as he was more of a hands-on engineer than someone who enjoyed paperwork. The office was sleek and modern, a stark contrast to Donen's more utilitarian setup. After giving the receptionist my name, I was offered coffee and a seat on the couch while Mickey D. was getting ready to see me. "No, Mr. Reynolds, it's Mickey D.," she said with a smile. To my surprise, Mickey D. was indeed Mickey D., an attractive woman, probably in her early 30s. She wasn't fazed when I stumbled over my words as we shook hands. She gave me a firm yet feminine grip that I found pleasing. For the next couple of hours, we discussed my traits, preferences, and my approach to engineering. Our conversation was polite and pleasant. We subtly addressed why I was leaving Benton Manufacturing. She knew it wasn't appropriate to ask personal questions, but gave me the space to share if I wanted. I was passed over for president and underpaid for the work I was doing. I told her, "Gosh, Joe, it's already 11:45. I bet you're ready for lunch. I'll send my report to Tim, and he'll be in touch with more details. Would it be against company policy if I took you out to lunch? You know, like a new employee tour?" She asked with a sly grin. "I'd love to do that," I replied. And so we went out for the first of many lunches, which turned into dinners, and more over the next few months. I was slow to jump into a relationship, but I was eager to spend time with her. I really enjoyed her company. From her reaction, she seemed happy with the pace and the development of our friendship. During this time, Benton Manufacturing was struggling financially. Even though they had the cash to pay the bills, the money just wasn't available. Richard had to act fast, as vendors and suppliers needed to be paid. He had to dip into his emergency assets to keep the company afloat. The 160 acres of prime land close to town were worth millions, but the thought of mortgaging it sent a chill through the Bentons, who had owned the property for over a century. They used the mortgage funds to keep things running until Richard went to the Caymans to gain control of the money. Unfortunately, the damage to their reputation was severe. Suppliers who used to allow 14-day credit terms now demanded cash up front. This severely hurt their working capital, and the mortgage wasn't paid off when the money from the Caymans finally made it back to the States. As time passed, Mickey D learned the details of the explosion in my personal and professional life. She was understanding, as her world had exploded too. 2 years ago, a UPS truck had run over and eliminated her husband, the founder and driving force behind Reynolds Resources. After his passing, she had worked tirelessly to keep the business afloat. Meanwhile, John told me that someone attacked Nathan in a dark bar parking lot. Nathan had taken several blows from a steel pipe. Lying on the ground, he begged for mercy, reaching up with his right hand. The attacker grabbed Nathan's middle finger and bent it back until he heard it snap. After a shriek of pain, Nathan passed out, missing the admonition from his attacker. "That's for sticking your finger in my wife," he growled. My job at Donan brought much-needed happiness into my life. I settled in quickly, and since I didn't have a non-compete clause with Benton Manufacturing, I started poaching their best customers. They knew I had left the company and were happy to hear from me. I wasn't the salesman Nathan had been, but I knew what the customers needed and how to produce it better, faster, and cheaper than Benton. Nathan, on the other hand, knew little about our products. He just knew they had to be paid for. He wasn't out calling on customers much as he kept getting hurt, usually after leaving a bar. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my relationship with Mickey D was fantastic. In addition to being beautiful, loving, smart, and caring, she was a lot of fun to be with. After many dates and growing closer, our evenings became more intimate, not rough, but full of gentle touching, kissing, and caressing. One night it became clear that Mickey D was acting as though she wanted to be in bed with me. After dancing a bit closer than usual, she picked up on my attraction. As her leg brushed against mine, she looked up with those stunning eyes and asked, "Shall we leave now?" "Absolutely," I replied. Then I kissed her with more passion than I ever had before. We couldn't keep our hands off each other. On the way home, things almost got out of control, but when endorphins are flowing, how could we stop? It wasn't a wild, shirt-ripping contest, just slow, deliberate undressing in her bedroom, both of us exploring unfamiliar territory. Our breathing quickened, heart rates rose. Then, as we paused, she whispered in my ear, "Did you bring protection?" "No," I replied. "I'm sterile." That's why Diane had Nathan's child. What did the doctor say about being sterile? No, doctor. My mom told me I had the mumps as a kid, and that's why I couldn't get Diane pregnant. The same mother who lied to you about your father and encouraged your wife to be with my brother. If I were you, I wouldn't believe a word she says. You need a real doctor's opinion." She paused. "Now let's have some amazing intimacy." By morning, we'd shared intimacy at least 4 times, and I believed Mickey D had probably quadrupled that number. After we'd both exhausted our energy, the topic of my fertility came up. I promised to see a fertility specialist and get my prostatic fluid tested. Of course, I'd have to wait a week until my body recovered. Anything close to the prostatic fluid count I produced that weekend should be fine. After an awkward visit to the doctor's office for the prostatic fluid test, I was told to return in a week for the results. Since Mickey D was curious, I asked her to come with me to the appointment. The doctor didn't take long to inform us that I wasn't infertile. My prostatic fluid count was 25 million, which was lower than average, but not alarmingly so. The normal range is between 50 and 100 million. The mobility of my prostatic fluid was also within the average range. The doctor reassured us that unless we were trying to conceive immediately, there was no reason to worry. He suggested I take some vitamins and avoid excessive drinking, as that might help. His best advice: the best way to get pregnant is not to try too hard. It's a bit like roulette. Your prostatic fluid just needs to meet the egg. With my lower prostatic fluid count, the odds were slim but not impossible. Mickey D went back on birth control, and I used a condom. For a couple of months, we decided it was best to wait until after the new year to think about moving in together. But first, she wanted me to meet her parents. She told them she was dating a great man, and they were eager to meet me. I was a little nervous as we drove up to a large but unassuming house. As soon as the door opened, Mickey D stepped in front of me and hugged a man in gray slacks and a red Christmas sweater. She turned slightly to the right and said, "Daddy, I want you to meet the man I love, Joe Benton." "Joe, meet my father," I interrupted, saying, "Mr. Donen." "Oops," I said. "Tim, I didn't know you were her father." "Wow, I don't know what to say. Just say nice to see you, Tim, and come on inside." "Why didn't you tell me Tim was your father? Don't you think that would have been something I'd be interested in?" "Yes, Joe," Mickey D answered, "and that's why we didn't want you to know. We wanted to see if you were interested in me or my inheritance. Plus, we didn't want you to take heat from the employees for dating the boss's daughter and only heir to the company. Like me, I had a younger brother, but he died when he was 16. So what does being invited to Christmas dinner with your parents mean for me?" I asked. "Joe, it means I love you and want you to meet my family. Business is separate. Since you've told me you have no family, I'm asking you to spend Christmas with mine." "Okay, now I get it about Mickey D. The D is for Donen," I said. "I really am oblivious, aren't I?" She giggled and replied, "Maybe you should have a D in your name for duh." We all laughed and the tension eased. We had a wonderful afternoon and evening. I genuinely enjoyed spending time with Tim and Mickey's mother, Barbara. Although I was a bit oblivious, I got the sense that my request for Mickey's hand in marriage would be met with approval from her parents. I was pretty sure Mickey would say yes, but after everything I'd been through, I didn't want to take anything for granted. My instinct proved right. 3 months later, when I went down on one knee with a blue velvet box in my hand, Mickey jumped off the couch and into my arms. She kissed me passionately, then pulled back just long enough to pant, "Yes, yes, yes." Then she returned to kissing me as if her life depended on it, and I didn't mind her enthusiasm one bit. 3 months after Mickey D and I got married, we had a small private wedding. There were no guests from my side of the family, just John, Sindra, and a few new friends. After a relaxing honeymoon in the Caribbean, we returned to my apartment and started our new life together. The first thing we did was decide it was time for Mickey to stop taking her birth control pills. We figured it might take a while for us to conceive, so we were in no rush. We also went to the county courthouse to change our names. Mickey decided to return to her maiden name, Mickey Donen, and I followed suit, changing my name to Joseph Timothy Donen. We felt it was the right move for both of us. When we asked him for his blessing, he was touched, tears in his eyes as he whispered, "Thank you, son. That meant a lot to me." Meanwhile, John had found a video of Diane and Nathan together, one of the many from their affair, and determined to get some retribution for both of us. He sent copies to several junior and senior boys at the school where Diane worked. The video was titled Principal Embarrassing Lesson 101. A week later, Diane was walking down the hallway at school when she began hearing barking sounds. At first, she thought it was some kind of strange coincidence, but the barking continued, coming from groups of boys in the hallways. When she stepped into the office, it stopped, only to start up again as soon as she left. After the video of Diane and Nathan spread, the students at her school began mocking her in the most humiliating ways. Their disruptive behavior, like making barking noises, was relentless, and it completely destroyed her credibility and respect among the staff and students. At first, she tried to ignore it, but as the noise followed her everywhere, she became more and more uncomfortable. The barking grew louder as she walked across the school grounds the next morning, and she quickly realized that someone had spread the video of her and Nathan. It was a humiliation she wasn't prepared for. After a tense encounter with Nathan at his office, where she demanded to know if he had leaked the video, he claimed he hadn't, saying the video had been hacked and gone viral. But Diane knew the damage was done. Her reputation, her career, and her dignity were on the line. She tried to push through the day, but it was clear that her professional life was unraveling. She bolted from her office and ran home to tend to her wounds. The next day, she went back to work, but the damage was beyond repair. The boys at school continued to mock her, and she eventually lost all credibility with the staff, students, and the school board.